Okay, this is the intro to the recording for the Friday night Sabbath Eve Bible study for the 8th day of May 2020. We'll give the Hebrew date when we go live. God willing, we're going live on the Facebook Live Sabbath service page. And we'll begin just as soon as we get a green light from Facebook Live. And what's up, Duck? Oh, do we have it? Yeah, looks like we've got the... No, we don't. Just because I hit the wrong button. All right, let's try that again. All right. It looks like we have a green light from Facebook Live, so Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath for this Friday evening, Sabbath Eve, on the 15th day of the second month on God's holy sacred calendar. And as some of you may wonder, well, Stephen, why is it you always start with the Hebrew date before you give us the Roman calendar date? Well, I'm giving it to you in order of preeminence because the Hebrew date is the primary date. I mean, in fact, it'll be the only date once Jesus Christ returns. The 15th day of the second month, oh, that means for those of you who missed the Passover during the first month on the evening of the 14th, last night, the 14th of the second month, is the second Passover for those who missed the first. Now, usually, I stream that every year for people at the time of the second Passover. I was out of town on the way back, but it took me a long time to get back from the Northeast. I was exhausted driving by myself. I just went a few hundred miles a day. One of my friends thought I went around the moon, but not really. It just looks that way on a map. It's actually shorter than a route I took, 95. Some people showed me how it's shorter than 81 South coming back from the Northeast to Birmingham, Alabama, because if you look at it on a map, you just measure what you see on the flat paper. You're not getting all the hills up and down and up and down. You're not getting the true mileage. Um, and the true mileage is longer than coming on the flat 95 over to 20. 400 miles from one location from where 20 meets 95 in South Carolina, and about the same distance, 400 and some odd miles from Florence, South Carolina, to my home in Birmingham. So you go across a long way this way, but you go up this way, and then boom, you're just a little ways to where you otherwise are going. And if you stay on that, you can go right smack straight up to Washington, D.C., Manassas. Interesting, not far away from D.C. is a city called Manasseh, which was one of the two sons of Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh. Manasseh representing, or his descendants being, the modern day descendants for the most part, or at least used to be for the most part. Now we're times of the Gentiles, we're being taken over by Gentiles in the land of Manasseh, a land that God gave to Manasseh. And when you understand who's who, that means something to you, or should mean something to you. All right, where are we on the calendar? All right, it's May 8th, 2020, Friday night until midnight on the Roman calendar. It's the 15th day of the second month on God's holy day calendar. And in the morning, although the Roman calendar date will change to May 9, it will still be the 15th day of the second month in the morning. Now, where are we in our count toward Pentecost? Because we're in the midst of the Feast of Weeks, as God refers to it in several places in the Bible, including Exodus. Let me bring this up. Let's see, is our Bible program working? Eh, not really. And you know, I apologize to those of you who are hard of hearing. 45. We have the closed caption goodie device working on screenshot 45. So, and where is it we put that? That should be right here, I think. 45, screenshot 45. Let's see if this will pop it up. Oh, well, let's see. It's not only popped it up, it's covering, it's completely covering the screen here where I'm sitting. Ah, yeah, okay. Now, so we don't want it there. Let's try this one right here. 45. I know there are some of you who depend on this, and nah, that's not the right place. Let's see. What about here? Let me just try this one more time, and then if it don't work, we'll straighten it out another time. Okay, that's not working there. All right, well, I apologize to those of you who need that. That should be on this one down here. And you know what? Give me just a moment. I think I can straighten this out real quick. First of all, we'll do this. Then we'll do this one right here, down about right here. All right, then we'll stretch it out wider, yeah, like this. Then we'll bring it down some. Let's see, right about. It's supposed to fit right about here. Let's see. And oops. All right, you see what I'm doing? Okay, that moves it, and this one sizes it. Make it a little bit smaller without getting it too small. And all right, that's just kind of a rough adjustment, but for those of you who tell me you need and appreciate the closed captions, there we go. We got it for you. All right, I didn't do everything I'm supposed to do to that. I'm supposed to hit some button that makes it screen and color key. I'm supposed to hit this color key and this one maybe. All right, we'll adjust that. We'll adjust that another time, but at least you have it for those of you who need it. Now, but actually, I'm going to have to get it out of the way in just a moment. Let's see. Let me come in here tighter for just a minute. Get the lower third out of the way, and tell you where we are on our count for the Feast of Weeks. Oh yeah, I was trying to see if we were going to be able to get the Bible verse up on the screen, but that program is not working. I'll just have to tell you from Exodus 34, chapter 34, Exodus, and verse 22, God says, "And you shall observe the Feast of Weeks." Now, the Feast of Weeks is not your wave sheaf day, although it includes the wave sheaf day as the very beginning of the Feast of Weeks. And it's not Pentecost. Your Feast of Weeks are the 7 weeks running up to Pentecost. And then the day following the Feast of Weeks is Pentecost. And so your total count 50 includes your Feast of Weeks, your 7 weeks of the Feast of Weeks, and then the 50, count 50 is the next day after the 7 weeks are all over. So Exodus 34:22. I'm looking at a device over here behind the screen. It says, "And you shall observe the Feast of Weeks of the first." Excuse me. The Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of wheat harvest. First fruits of wheat harvest. And it also mentions observing the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year, at the year's end. Now let me ask you a question. So you can get used to all the terms that God uses for these particular feasts that last a week long or several weeks long. I was thinking of Feast of Unleavened Bread in the spring when I said last a week long, and the Feast of Tabernacles that last a week long at the end of the year. Would the way this is expressed in Exodus 34, verse 22, would it be that the Feast of Ingathering is another name for the Feast of Tabernacles? And I'm putting that in the form of a question so it can be a little test for you. And if you want to answer down in the comments section, whether you're watching this live as we stream it live, or if you're watching it later from the video archive where we have our recordings, you can answer it there. Is the Feast of Ingathering the same thing as the Feast of Tabernacles? Yes or no? And of course, in case we ask another question later, maybe you want to say, no, the Feast of Ingathering is not the same as the Feast of Tabernacles, or yes, the Feast of Ingathering is the same as the Feast of Tabernacles, just another name. All right, that's a question for you, a quiz question. And is the Feast of Weeks another name for Pentecost? Yes or no? All right, and I'll elaborate on that later after you've had an opportunity to respond in the comments section if you'd like to do that. All right, so that's Exodus 34 and verse 22. Also, Exodus 23, verse 16 says, and the Feast of Harvest, the first fruits of your labors. So going over to Exodus 23 and comparing that with Exodus 34, we see another name for the Feast of Weeks is Feast of Harvest, because it says the first fruits of your labors. The Feast of Harvest is the first fruits of your labor, which you have sown in the field. And then it also adds, similar to Exodus 34, verse 22, it adds, and the Feast of Ingathering, which is in the end of the year, when you have gathered in your labors out of the field. All right, so we do know this. If you're going to answer that question, is the Feast of Ingathering the same as the Feast of Tabernacles? We do know that the Feast of Ingathering is described in Exodus 23 and in Exodus 34 as being at the end of the year. That would put it in the fall time season. You know, there are no feasts in the winter season. In the winter, but, you know, generically it's winter's included, roughly, in the seasons as God uses them. Basically, there are 3 times in the year, or 3 seasons, when God puts feast days into a year, an astronomical solar year. Okay, now what else do we have for you? All right, what I want to do. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry, I meant to have the closed captions up for those who are hard of hearing, but I will need to get those out of the way in just a moment so that you can better see the calendars. On this side of me, I've got April and May in one calendar, and on this screen we have just the month of May, where at the bottom I got it covered up with the closed captions. I wonder if we could move the just temporarily. Let's see, can I create a shot in which we can move the closed caption down? Yeah, I think we can do it like this. All right, let's come over here to this shot. I know it looks the same, but it's actually a different shot, and this will allow me to grab onto the closed caption and just move them down. Let's see. Let's move that. Let's move that color bar on which the closed captions rests. They're supposed to screen through that. All right. Now, well, I did that so that you could see this bottom column down here. It's only got one date in it over on the far left side where the first day of the week appears, Sunday, May 31st. That's where we count 7 weeks, and the morrow after the seventh Sabbath day, at the end of that seventh week, we number as 50. And so where are we right now? Let's go back to this calendar over here. Let me come in tight for just a moment. I know we'll lose our lower third, but I meant to say we'll lose the closed captions for just a moment, but I wanted you to be able to see we got April on top, May on the bottom here. And this year, since since Passover was on a date early in April, April 8th, the Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread that follow immediately, the 7 days that follow immediately after Passover, the Sabbath in the midst of the days of unleavened bread are your target Sabbath, or your zero Sabbath. In the far right-hand margin over here, you can see I have 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42, 49, and then 50. Well, up through 49, each one of those represents the number of the Sabbath in number of days through the Feast of Weeks. So at the end of the first week, the Sabbath that occurred on April 18 is the seventh day of the 50-day count. Does that make sense to you? But the Sabbath that occurs during the days of unleavened bread is not one of those 7 weeks. It's the zero Sabbath that triggers when the wave sheaf day is that begins the count. The wave sheaf day, the wave sheaf offering is the morrow after the Sabbath during unleavened bread. And that Sabbath, being your triggering Sabbath, is counted as zero. That's your zero Sabbath. And so technically, when we got, I don't want to say hung up, but when we misunderstood what God intended because of English grammar rules dictating that we count from, because the word from was added in Leviticus 23 verses 15 and 16 that is not in the original Hebrew. The word from was added, so that caused us to count from a day instead of including it. But once we understood the original Hebrew, the way it was written and its intent, if you were going to add a preposition, it would have been better to have added beginning with rather than the word from in those two verses 15 and 16 of Leviticus 23. But understanding it, and my purpose tonight is not to go through the details of that. I've done that before. We'll do that again just before Pentecost itself. But and those are in our archive in case you want to go back and hear all those ad infinitum detail. But the main point is this. We do, if you were going to use the word from for counting from something, we're not counting from the wave sheaf day the way we misunderstood it because of the misrendering or mistranslations of the Bible, including especially the King James Version, which a lot of your other versions patterned off of. The King James Version said essentially count from the morrow after the Sabbath during unleavened bread. So counting from that morrow after is the wave sheaf day. So counting from the wave sheaf day, we did not count the wave sheaf day as part of the 50 count, as part of the numbering. But it very much belongs in the numbering, and our count begins with the Wave Sheaf Day, which is the morrow after the Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread. Now, we can say correctly, with correct English grammar, we can say that we count from, not the morrow after the Sabbath during unleavened bread, but we actually count from that Sabbath. And that Sabbath is numbered as 0 because it's not included in the count. And so we count from that Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread. And then counting from that Sabbath, that makes the morrow after that Sabbath be day number 1. And the description God gives for when the Wave Sheaf Day is, it's the morrow after that Sabbath during the days of unleavened bread. This year it fell on April 12, as you can see in this column right up here at the top. April 12, dark green color, the Wave Sheaf Offering Day. Day number 1 of your 50-day count, and that's always on the first day of the week, always on a Sunday. That begins a week that's a normal week of first day through the end of the week, the 7th day of the week. So when we get to the 18th of that first week, the 12th being the beginning of the count, the Wave Sheaf Day, the Sabbath is the end of the week in which the Wave Sheaf offering occurs, is week number 1, and that Sabbath is the 7th, is number 7 in the 50-day count. So I've got a 7 out in the far margin over there saying this is where we are in our numbering. The following week, April 25, that was our second week of Sunday through Sabbath weeks. And at the end of that week, we were at day number 14. Then we come into May. Well, actually, we start the week at April 26th, right here. And at the end of that week, we transition into May 1st and 2nd. And so the Sabbath at the end of that week is May 2nd. And that's the 3rd. That's the end of the 3rd week of the 7 weeks count. That was May 2nd was the 21st day in our 50-day count. And today, as of sunset tonight, it becomes the Sabbath. So we're going to go ahead and look at the day at the end of the week that begins on May 3rd. You'll see over on the far side, there on this column, the far side of this line, May 9 is your 1, 2, 3, 4. Your 1, 2, 1, 2. You're counting from the right place. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your 4th. It's the end of the 4th week of your 7 weeks of the Feast of Weeks. And the end of the 4th week, May 9, we're at 28 days into the 50-day count. So we have 3 more full weeks of the 7 weeks of the Feast of Weeks to go. And then the morrow after that Sabbath in the 7th week is day number 50. And you can see it right here at the bottom of the May. You'll see it's May 31st. That's Pentecost this year, May 31st, Sunday. And today, again, being the 9th day. Well, tonight it's May 8, but after sunset it's the Sabbath, so we're going to call it May 9 for our counting purposes. So we got 1, 2, 3 more full weeks to go before Pentecost, May 31st this year. All right, 2020, May 31st. And that's day number 50, because all your other days going through 7 weeks, April 12 up here, April 12 through April 18, that's 7 days. April 19 through 25, that's 14 days, that's the end of that week. April 26 through May 2nd, that's 21 days by the end of that week, May 2nd. And then this week, May 3rd through May 9, that May 9 point puts us at 28 days into the count toward 50, Pentecost Day, for the Feast of Weeks and Pentecost. Okay, Did we muddy that up enough for you? I hope not. I hope we made it clear as a bell. And then on the bigger version of the map, you can see over there on the bottom, at the end of the count, May 31st, first day of the week, 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks and a day from now. That's Pentecost this year. All right, can I tell you about something? Since it's late, it's after midnight already. We're doing a very late Friday night Bible study. Of course, it's after midnight where I am. It's after 10 o'clock in the evening over on the West Coast. But in the morning, we'll have this in the video archive. So for those of you on the East Coast who get up earlier than the rest of us as we go west through the country, as the time zones occur, time occurs, earliest first on the East Coast. So anyway, this will be in the video archive. Hopefully, God willing, it'll be in the video archive. I came back from a trip where I'd been up in the Northeast, and when I got back, my internet had been turned off because the bill hadn't been paid while I was away. And so, even though it was Sabbath, I got on the phone I didn't have to pay them any money. I just got on the phone with the internet company, and they not only turned it back on, they turned it back on on the front cable, the cable in the front of the house. So we're no longer running a long cable through the backyard from the trailer in the back, the way I was. I do that as a means of I have 2 accounts with the cable company, and they know about it. They don't care, but they have to follow their rules. After 1 year of a promotional price, they have to jack you up to the new price, and they went up to $70 just for internet on me. And by switching to the cable on the front house, a different account, and we have a trailer in the back, so I run the other account on the trailer, and then I just run a long cable from the trailer to the house to get that promotional price. Well, since my year on that is up, and they wanted to jack the price up to $70, I said, "Hey, hold it." In fact, I got them let's see, I got them on the phone. I've had the phone ringing for over an hour. Okay, it must have answered and they hung up. Finally. I want to cut off the one on the trailer in the back because I got this, believe it or not, I got this $18 price, $17.99 for a promotion to the cable running to the front part of the house. So that's a nice break for us. We've had a lot of bills over our head talk about over your head, the roof. I saw Ray Green tonight. They had to spend, he was telling me, $8,000 plus $4,000 on their roof. So, roof repairs and replacement are expensive. And we spent over $30,000 here, and I'm choking trying to get that all paid now. All right, off of retirement income. But what was I going to tell you about this here? But the cable was off when I got back in town late this afternoon or this evening. And with a simple phone call, poof, boom, it's back on. And they're even waiving one bill. So, boy, we got a blessing tonight. Those of you who've been praying for us, I appreciate it. And it's paid off. All right, while I was away, I picked up a book that is entitled, I don't know if you can see this on your screen or not, maybe, let's see. Well, there's nobody behind the camera to change the focus. Maybe you can see this. Let's see if I hold it in the right place. Let's see. I got to look at it to see. I can't see it off the screen. The Emotionally Destructive Relationship. Now, there's a reason why I picked up this book. It's by Leslie Vernick, who is also the author of The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. And what God is doing with us, brethren, is just a reminder. He is building a body, a spiritual temple a beautiful, holy body, a spiritual temple for Jesus Christ to return to and to marry. You know, we are called the body of Christ, also known as the Church of God, and that body, being fitly framed like a building, a spiritual temple, is being made ready, and we're even told ourselves to make the bride ready for Christ's return. And let me bring my Bible over here. And this book, I've got several books related to, uh, one of them I really liked. I don't know if I got it in the room here with us, but one I really liked was How to Become Your Partner's Better Half, or something like that. I may not have the title exactly right, but when I saw that, I thought, okay, if we're being built into a spiritual bride for Jesus Christ, why, we want to be the best bride there ever was for Jesus Christ, better than any human bride or wife has ever been. We want to be the most pleasing, most wonderful, most beautiful, loving bride for Jesus Christ we possibly can be. And we do that collectively, as you know, it's one body but many members. So that's how we can all be the wife of Jesus Christ. We're part of one body. We are a consortium of many members made into one badeo, into one body, and one beautiful body. And you know, God illustrates that to make comparisons. The nose and the ear are not the same thing, you know, or the eye and the mouth are not the same thing, or the toes are not the same as the toes and the nose are not the same thing. And those are external parts of the body, and then there are internal parts. And God makes a reference to all that as being, we are, you know, different. We have different gifts, and we're different, you know, but we all become part of the same body, being made ready for Jesus Christ to be a beautiful body, a most lovely spiritual temple. And books like this can help us, you know. Leslie Vernick wrote a book called The Emotionally Destructive Marriage, and, you know, with suggestions on how to take that destructive part out of the people who are part of the marriage. And in situations where, you know, you're not married but you're in a relationship where you notice that, woo, wow, it's toxic, it's emotionally destructive, there's a lot of good help in here. On page 37, for example, um, I'll read you one paragraph. It says, Leslie Vernick says, in all healthy relationships, personal or professional, the well-being of the other person is important to us even when we're mad, tired, or busy. At its most basic level, commitment promises that the other person's feelings, desires, needs, wants, and thoughts will matter to us, and that when the person considers something urgent or important, we give it our attention. This doesn't mean we have to do what the person wants. We don't even necessarily have to feel the same way about an issue, but at least we give it proper thought, Miss Vernick says. Now, you know, where's that Mr. Vernick? I think it may be Mr. Vernick, the way he's describing some things that happened in his office. Um, yeah, actually, I'm not sure. Leslie can be a man or a woman's name. And let's see. To men and women I have met, those who have trusted God to change them have moved beyond being victim or victimizer and are becoming whom God intended them to become. Well, it still doesn't tell me whether Leslie is a man or a woman. It is a woman because the back says Leslie Vernick, a licensed clinical social worker and relationship coach, has authored numerous books including Lord, I Just Want to Be Happy. She has completed postgraduate work in biblical counseling and cognitive therapy. Leslie and her husband Howard have been married nearly 40 years and have 2 grown children and 3 grandchildren. Now, there are a few things in here where she refers to psychiatrists or psychologists and stuff like that you kind of have to just overlook. But for the most part, and I've read most of the book in between my driving from the Northeast during the past 2.5, 3 days, whatever. I got fascinated by the book. I picked it up toward the start of my trip in a truck stop at the Choice Books stand. And you've probably seen Choice Books they have them at Walmart. They have a stand in Walmart and many other stores. Even some public grocery stores will have it. You know what? I should switch to the screen over here for a moment because for those of you who need the closed or want the closed captions, we've got those working again, as you can see. Whew, we had some problems here in the studio since we had a break-in and a virus put in the afternoon of the break-in. And it's taken us a long time to recover from that. I'm still recovering from it health-wise even. Shook me up. But Mrs. Vernick writes very well, and she has some good points. Some people are legally married, but uncommitted to their spouse's nurture, support, or welfare. The consistent disregard for a partner's thoughts, feelings, and well-being creates significant emotional distress because the promise of commitment and expectation of care is clearly part of the marital covenant. She says genuine caring values the other person's happiness, well-being, and goodness. Selfish love is only interested in what the other person has to contribute to the relationship. Okay, there's a lot of detail and a lot of things that can help you work through where you may be finding it just plain toxic, the way some things in a relationship go between two people. And this can help be able to discuss the details of what someone is doing and help them see it, and yourself help you see what you may need to examine and change. Let's see if there's anything else worth pointing out. There's Mrs. Vernick quotes some scripture, and she does it in good context. The fearful heart, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. Proverbs 29, verse 25. As he's using the New International Version, I would prefer to go with either the King James or the Revised Standard or the American Standard Version, or all of the above. All individuals in destructive relationships have fearful hearts. They are afraid of seeing truth, afraid of being hurt, afraid of loss, afraid of being wrong, afraid of rejection, afraid of conflict, afraid of change, afraid of being alone, afraid they might not have what it takes to succeed, afraid to be loved, afraid to give love, afraid they might not be adequate or desirable or lovable. Because, because of some or all of these fears, anxious people may pretend, placate, and please or threaten, manipulate, dominate, and abuse others in the hope that if they can successfully control others or life, their deepest fears won't come true. Their mission is not usually malicious, but self-protective. They cannot love well and are destructive toward both themselves and others. All right, those are just a few comments from the book that excerpts I can give you tonight, and yeah. All right, I'll be reading more of this, and maybe I'll share a few more comments with you from time to time. Um, yeah, because there, there are a number of good principles and things in here that we can incorporate in dealing with other people and other brethren as God develops us as many members into one body. One body. And we definitely don't want to have anything in the body. God doesn't want to have anything in the body that is emotionally destructive. And so, one thing about reading this book, whether you're in a relationship with someone else who to you seems to be very emotionally destructive or not, there's some things in this book that will just, especially at Passover time, will help you in your examination of yourself. You can, as you read these things, you can ask, hey, am I doing any of this? There's a comment right here on page 220 that says, for destructive people, their tongues are their weapons. Um, well, let's see what went before that. In the past, if you've been reactive when someone pushes your buttons, your hot buttons, Ms. Vernick recommends step back, both physically and emotionally, in order to distance yourself. Treat the provocative person much like you treat a stranger. Have no expectations of a positive encounter. Be cordial, respectful, and kind, but don't get too close. And right now, during the coronavirus pandemic, they tell people to keep social distance of at least 6 feet from one another. Excuse me. Don't get too close. Well, you don't want to get too close. You want to step back. If someone pushes your hot buttons, both physically and emotionally, in order to distance yourself, you'd especially be wary if you suspected that the stranger may be carrying a weapon. For destructive people, their tongues are their weapons. So that's the context in which that statement fell. Ms. Vernick recommends putting on your spiritual armor, which protects us against evil, much like a hazmat suit protects its wearer from toxins in the environment. It's a good practice to remember to put it on every day, but intentionally put it on, piece by piece, when you know you'll be in contact with a destructive person. Jesus specifically commands us to respond radically differently than our natural selves would. No longer retaliate. One of the most surest signs of your own emotional and spiritual growth and maturity is that you no longer retaliate when someone hurts you or does wrong to you. Jesus calls us to love our enemies and do them good, not harm. Matthew 5, verses 43 through 45. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12, verse 21. And Overcome is a fighting word, she says. It means to prevail or conquer. She gives the example of Abigail with David, King David, uh, warding off the um, anger that her husband had caused David, that was going to call David, that had moved David to wipe out all of her husband's servants and her husband as well. But anyway, Abigail, she gives an example of how Abigail used some things to sidestep emotional destruction, or to help King David change his mind about that. Now, there's a mention of the history of the Jews. God often promised Israel she would defeat her opponents, but he still required her participation. Um, there was one time when he said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the eternal." But this reminds me of some verses I promised to find for someone when a discussion came up that where a reference was made to how Jesus Christ came only to the house of Israel. And the person I was talking to about that said, "What?" And so here it is. Um, the way to find it is to do a concordance search on the word crumbs, because the person who wanted a healing for her daughter made reference to crumbs and did so effectively and cleverly and effectively that Jesus Christ responded with a great compliment to the woman, saying that she answered and said, "Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs." Let me give you the whole context of that. It so impressed Jesus Christ by what she, not just the words, but the principle, the understanding that she had, that he exclaimed something very great about her. Now, I can't put the scripture up on the screen. I got to look at it off screen on a monitor over here on this side. Starting in verse 24 of Mark 7. Well, actually, I'd rather start with Matthew. In Matthew 15 at verse 27, oh, wait a minute. Let me back it up. We're hitting the first. Makes reference to the crumbs. So let me back it up. Really good. Really wise thing this woman said. She showed a great common sense or street wisdom. Starting in verse 22 of Matthew 15. "And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto Jesus Christ, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, you son of David. My daughter is grievously ill, and she's grievously vexed with a devil." But Jesus answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, "Send her away, for she cries after us." But Jesus answered and said, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Now that's verse 24. Then in verse 25 came she and worshipped him, saying, "Lord, help me." Verse 26, but he answered and said, "It's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs." Now listen to the comeback of this woman, the common street sense she had, and her belief and faith that she had, that caused Jesus Christ to respond in a remarkable way. Jesus answered and said, It's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. And she said, Truth, truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from the master's table. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you even as you will. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. And Jesus departed from thence and came into the Sea of Galilee, and then another story. Okay, but if we go over to Mark chapter 7, and it talks about the crumbs in verse 28, so we'll pick up from there. And then verse 29, Jesus said to her, For this saying, where it's quoted in verse 28 is with her saying, Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. And Jesus said unto her, For this saying, where she had just said, Lord, the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. And he said unto her, For this saying, go your way. The devil is gone out of your daughter, Jesus told her. For this saying, this thing you said, go your way. The devil's come out of your daughter. And then Jesus exclaimed how he felt about it. And when first though it says, and when she came to her house, when she was come to her house, she found the devil gone out and her daughter laid upon the bed. All right, now to get when we go to Luke 16, that gives us what I want to tell you about here about this verse. No, not there. Christ makes an exclamation. Maybe it's back in Matthew 15. He talks about such faith he hasn't seen in all Israel. Let's see, what happened to that verse? Let me line it up here where I can scoot around on the verse. Oh, okay, yeah, I missed it at verse 28. I skipped ahead. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, this is in Matthew 15, verse 28. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is your faith, be it unto you even as you will. Well, there's some place, I don't know if it's this story, maybe it's another one, where Christ makes the reference that such faith he hasn't seen in all Israel. Let's see, maybe that's the one in Mark 7, and I just missed it. Let's see. For this saying, where she just said, Yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs, yes, Lord. For this saying, go your way, the devil has come out of your daughter. Well, now I'm curious. There's somewhere where it talks about faith. I'm going to put in my electronic concordance, I'm going to put two words, faith. And let's put Israel so that'll come up in the same verse. I think that'll give us the verse I'm looking for. In Matthew 8:10, when Jesus heard it, he marveled and said to them that followed, Verily, truly, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. Also in Luke 7 and in Hebrews 11. Let's see which one Matthew 8 is relating to. Okay, that's when the man in authority came to Christ, a centurion. All right, let's see what the other one is. In Luke 7, verse 9, is that the same parallel story? Yeah, same one. I'm a man set under authority. When Jesus heard these things, he marveled at him and turned him about and said unto the people that followed him, I say to you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. All right. So he didn't say that about the woman, but he did say, for this saying, where she was wise enough to say after Christ said, look, it's not meat for me to give this to the dogs. And she quickly said, yes, Lord, but the dogs under the table eat of the master's crumbs from the table. Uh, and the overall point where I had made reference to that verse was because Jesus said he's only come, let me see how that says that exactly again. He said he's only come to the house of Israel. Let's see. And you can find that those two verses by simply punching in the one word crumbs in your electronic concordance, and then back up your scriptures back or go forward from that center verse about the woman saying that, truth, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the crumbs that fall from the master's table. That's one. That's the way she worded it. That's the way it's recorded by Matthew in Matthew 15, verse 27. And in verse 28, Christ saying, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you even as you will." And again, the daughter was made whole that very hour. I had to heal. I went and prayed for someone this afternoon. He's being anointed. Ray Green up in Odenville, Alabama. He has cancer on the right side of his neck. So those of you who are prayer warriors and look for people to be praying for, Ray Green. He spells green with an E at the end. Green-E. Just like you normally spell green, just add an E on to the end of it. Ray Green of Odenville, Alabama, has a second bout with cancer on his neck, right side of his neck, if you want to be praying for Ray. Ray Green. All right, Ray, very helpful to a man I was serving and helping in Alabama, Mr. Robert Collins, who served in the ministry here for over 50 years. See, what was I? Was I going to point out anything else to you about this verse or the next one, or the parallel verse in Mark 7? And she answered and said, "Yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs." He said unto her, "For this saying, go your way, the devil is gone out of your daughter." When she came to the house, she found the devil gone out. And, all right, I think I maybe told you everything I was going to tell you about that. All right, I think we should keep this short tonight since it's very, very late. I still have to upload this to the archive. This will give you an hour-long Bible study, which will get your morning started out for those of you on the East Coast who listen in the morning anyway, rather than these late. Even if I had been on time tonight at the regular scheduled time, it's still kind of late for people on the East Coast, and I know some of you watch it from the archive in the morning instead. And because it's kind of extra early, our normal time is extra early on the West Coast. Some people there watch it from the archive either later that evening or next morning. You've got that option. And I'm going to sign off. Wish you all that's going to cover up the closed captions, but wish you all a happy Sabbath for the whole day, and tonight a real good night's sleep, because it is Sabbath and a time to get some rest and be refreshed. And we'll do something with Mr. Armstrong in the morning. I think you'll find refreshing that relates to these Feast of Weeks and what we're preparing for up to Pentecost Day, May 31st this year. As you can see on that far calendar, it's highlighted in purple. May 31, Pentecost, the morrow following the seventh Sabbath of the 7 Sunday through Sabbath weeks of the Feast of Weeks. And the morrow after the seventh Sabbath, after the seventh week, after the Sabbath, at the end of that week, the morrow after that is Pentecost, May 31 this year, 2020. All right, brethren, again, happy Sabbath, Shabbat Shalom. Until next time, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreath. Ta-ta.